Well, hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Women Like Me Stories in Business. I'm your host, Julie Fairhurst, and I have a very interesting lady here with us today. So let me tell you a little bit about her, and then we'll see what else she's got to share. So today we're joined with Tanya Ruckstuhl, a seasoned, licensed, independent clinical social worker based in Seattle. She has a master's in social work from the University of Kansas with over 2 decades of experience. So she should be able to answer all our questions. Tanya specializes in treating anxiety disorder, trauma, and adult ADHD. Beyond her clinical practice, this is the interesting part that I find. Tanya is the author of How to Be Human and Not an Asshole. Okay, I can think of a whole bunch of people that I want to buy this book for and give it to them. I love the title. So, welcome, Tanya. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Julie. It's so wonderful to be on your podcast and to be
Thank you.
connecting with you and through you to your listeners.
Oh, thank you. So, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I am the product of an American mother and an immigrant father. And I spent my first 5 years of life first in Kingston, Jamaica, and then in San Salvador, El Salvador, right in time for the Civil War. And so I would like to say that I have an orientation and an outlook that's not specific to Americans and is probably pretty well informed by the cultural mashup of my early life and then my subsequent childhood moving all over the place. And I'm very specifically curious and interested in how do people connect and how do they interpret each other. And I feel like right now we're in a crisis of capacity to connect, particularly in this country. And I think Canada is having its own political challenges as well. But
Yeah.
particularly in this country, there's a lot of belief that those who don't think like me are stupid. And I wrote this book in part because I'm trying to encourage generosity of interpretation and replacing panic with curiosity and just sort of instilling some values around not polarizing our perspectives. And I see this happening not just politically, but on all kinds of other levels as well. And I think there could be some connections to COVID and the lockdown and the social isolation and lack of practice that people went through for a period of time, as well as just, again, we're in a political situation here in the States where there's a tremendous amount of panic around changes that are happening. And when we're scared, we human beings do not do our best.
Well, and we have just gone through that in Canada. We had an election the other day, and it was quite the fight. And so, a lot of the people were voting one way for fear, and then
Mm,
even voting the other way for a different kind of fear. So I totally get what you're saying.
yeah,
Yeah, we're a
yeah.
bunch of this North American business. We're all living in fear over here.
It's really true. And the advantage that I have with my background is that I don't idealize other cultures. I hear a lot of sentiment in this country about, oh, late stage capitalism and, this, that, the other. And I just want to tell Americans, like, please go and spend time in a developing country and then make a decision about what we do or don't have in this country
Yeah.
because we human beings are easily frightened and we easily catastrophize, and the news is like fodder for catastrophic thinking. And catastrophic thinking is exactly the opposite of mental health. Mental health is about how do I calm myself down so that I can
Mhm.
respond to what is true in the world and not what my imagination or the imagination of other people can construe or come up with that is designed to like keep us riveted to our phones or to our screens and always clicking for more, 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 more.
Wow. Well, thank you for that because I think we needed to hear that. I needed to hear that. So thank you for that, Tanya. Thank you. Can I just jump in and because I really want to talk about your book for a minute. As you can see,
Yeah.
I'm the book girl over here.
Yes.
But what I want to know, what inspired you to write "How to Be Human and Not an Asshole"? I just love that title. Love it.
Thank you. I would love to take credit for the title. I had a much more sort of professional sounding and boring title, and one of my friends who's quite cut through it was like, "That's a terrible title. You should call it this." And I was like, "Yes, I will take that. That's perfect." So
Absolutely.
what inspired me is so much of my individual therapy sessions are focused around relationships that my clients are having out in the world. And so they bring in naturally into therapy interactions they're
Mm.
having that are hurting their hearts, where they're feeling unheard or where they're feeling oppressed. And sometimes there are what I call interpretation errors, where somebody will think, oh, I'm being really mistreated. But from another perspective, it's actually not about you at all. It's about what that other person might have going on in their life that could be informing their capacity to show up in a less than pleasant way. And
Mm.
so I just thought, there's some basic rules for how to engage with other people that tend to lead to greater connection and greater durability of connection. And so this book is like a series of essays around like that topic. How do we connect? How do we hold space for others while also protecting the boundaries and the needs that we individually have? Because so often what we do is we either get too big and
Yeah.
then inadvertently we squish the people around us, or for women in particular, we stay small in order to accommodate and to people please and to be acceptable and to be loved. And then what happens is we're no longer actually telling the truth about who we are. And the other person might have a lot of space, but it is at the expense of our ability to say, yeah, that doesn't actually work for me. So my book is about like, what is the ratio
Ah,
of you? What is the
yeah.
ratio of other people? And how do we really hold an equal sign between my sense of self and my belief in your right to have a sense of self, where I'm not dominating and I'm also not submitting?
Right. I love that.
Thank
If we could
you.
all just live in that space, we'd all get along a lot better for sure.
Right. Right. And then the
Yeah.
differences become interesting. They're not threatening because differences are not actually going to like, consume and swallow you.
Yes.
Differences are more like, oh, this is the hot sauce. Like, I have some relatives who have very strong religious opinions that I don't share whatsoever, but I appreciate that they derive great strength and meaning and family values from their religious belief system, and I don't have to reject them because I'm not going to be infected by their beliefs, right? It's like
Right.
they get to have this belief of reality, and I get to have this belief of reality, and it's not the same, but I'm not scared that they think
Right.
differently than I do.
Yeah. It's just a matter of respect.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also safety. It's like I think we become
Yeah.
fragile and we become
Mm.
reactive when we feel like we're not allowed to say, I see it differently.
Right. Right. Exactly. Wow. Very, very interesting. Okay, so we'll get off your book and let's move on to your therapeutic approach. So I'm curious, how do you determine what kind of approach you're going to use would best suit a client?
Oh, that's such a lovely question. And I wish I had a straightforward answer for you, Julie. What I can say is I consider myself therapeutically eclectic. I've been around the block long enough that I've been trained or even, let's say, indoctrinated in different therapeutic approaches. And all of them have aspects that I like, but there's no one approach to reality that is going to be, 360 degrees applicable and a fit. So I like to, first of all, ask my clients. Oftentimes they come into therapy with a history that includes receiving therapy. So if there's approaches that have been particularly useful or particularly problematic for them, I want to know both of those stories. But what I would say all of my approaches have in common is a humanistic belief in the movement of our spirit towards healing. That
Mhm.
we are here in Earth School to experience lots and lots of different kinds of experiences, difficulty and triumph and joy and loss and love and anger and all of the things. And I only want to operate from a paradigm that holds hope in its core.
Mhm. What about the differences between males and females? So, is
Yeah.
there a different counseling or therapeutic approach that you would use, men versus women?
I love that question. And what I would say is, I believe we are all blends of masculine and feminine energy. So to me, it's not so much men versus women, but it's like where on the spectrum a person's sort of primary energetic setting is. So I have clients who are sort of more masculine women or more feminine men. And I would say with my more masculine women or my more traditionally male clients, I can be a little bit more mm, kind of uh, direct,
Ah,
and even sometimes like using humor in a sharp way. Whereas if I'm working with somebody who's sort of more classically feminine, I actually have to soften a lot because my orientation is I'm sarcastic and I swear in sessions and I tend to be sort of uh, kind of a little goofy. And so for some people, I have to soften my style in order to actually be able to meet them where they need to be met emotionally. And then with other clients, I can just like let it rip
yeah, yeah,
and be irreverent. And I think that's a bunch of bullshit. I think you're
yeah.
lying to yourself about that.
Well, and so you must be able to read people fairly well then, especially all,
Not, no, I've made some mistakes, I will tell
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Well, once in a while, I'll get feedback that I hurt somebody's feelings,
Oh,
and that's actually really brave when my client says to me, "Hey, you said something to me last time we met, and I've thought about it, and I don't like this aspect of it." Like I always really give people praise when they come back
yeah.
and criticize me because it takes a tremendous amount of courage on their part, and it helps me as a therapist be kind of more round in my understanding of reality.
Absolutely. And you're right. It must be very courageous of them to do that. And I would think too that good for them because they're taking control of their healing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And part of what therapy is a practice space. So in therapy, people get to practice with their therapist, standing up for themselves, being assertive,
Ah,
talking back, disagreeing, all of the skills they actually need to have, like in the wild, they should be able to practice with their therapist.
right, of course. Wow. Hmm. That's really good. That's good.
Yeah,
That's a
thank
that's a
you.
that's a good thing. Okay, so well, I we've talked a little about humor, but let's talk about it again. So in your view, what role does humor play in the healing process?
Oh my goodness. So there's an expression that honey helps the medicine go down. And I
Yeah.
think that you could replace the word honey with humor. I mean, I just feel like, if we can laugh or we can dance or we can move or we can in some way be embodied together and have our hearts touched, then we can receive information in a way that's so much less defended. So I rely on humor a lot. And in fact, one of my personal life experiences is I'm married to a man who is much funnier than me, and it kind of kicks my butt.
Yeah.
It is a challenge to my ego that my husband is like 1,000 times funnier than I am. And I watch him in his life and in his work, and he can interact with people in a much more um, what am I going to try to say here? He can interact with people in a way that I would experience as too sharp and pointed, but because they're laughing and he entertains them, it's like it's okay, right? He can sort of get away with a lot. And
Yeah.
so I've adopted some of that into my therapy practice. It's different. He's a salesman, I'm a therapist. And
Yes.
so these are not the same things. But what I can do is observe and respect that his relationship with humor gives him entry into people's capacity to reflect on, am I behaving in a way that is absurd right now?
Yeah.
And I think humor is a great way to kind of elevate
Yeah.
awareness.
And salespeople, because I was one for 34 years. I retired
Oh,
last
congratulations.
year. Thank you. So salespeople, though, also have to be able to read people
Yes,
and
yes,
and be able
absolutely.
to adjust their behavior, adjust their
Totally.
tone, everything. So good for him to be able to, you make people feel good. They remember that.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about couples because you do
Mm.
couple therapy. So
Yes, I do.
I'm curious, what's one of the most common reasons that brings them into see you? I'm very curious about this.
Yeah, so what I would say the reported reason is often communication issues, where couples will say we're having problems communicating with each other, and their experiences that they get into these ritual fights again and again and again. And I think that that's incredibly common. But I would say that underneath the communication issues, it's the fear of unmet emotional needs. Underneath the communication issues,
Um,
both parties are saying, my needs don't feel important in my imagination to you. And so much of couples
mm,
therapy is teaching us how to move out of just the practicality of, you're on first, I'm on second, you're on dinner, I'm on dishes. You're taking the kids to soccer, I'm taking the kids to play date, and moving into what do each of us bring into our adult relationship that has to do with our childhood wounds that make us particularly sensitive in these different areas where we each have to have our antenna way out. Somebody, for instance, with a history of childhood abuse has to have a partner who understands to not yell, to not raise their voice, right? Because the expression of anger often precedes physical abuse, right?
right.
So there's a certain amount of constraining that both parties have to be willing to sign up for to make a long-lasting relationship work because we all have our wounds. And having those conversations about, I come from this history and this makes me particularly sensitive to this dynamic. And I want you, my partner, to have all the freedom to have your feelings. But this is an area where I'm asking you to talk about your needs in a way that doesn't include X or Y.
Right. What about the need to be right?
Oh my goodness. So there's a joke in the therapy world, which
Is
is
there?
exactly right, which is you can either be right or you can be married. Pick.
That's true. That's true.
It's so
Yeah,
true.
I find that uh, well, not recently, about a year ago, I was living, my husband and I, we recently sold our house and moved, and we were living in a strata, and there was a lady living in this strata, and she would get on our community page, and it didn't matter what you said. And so I remember, I normally don't get into issues with people, but she was irritating me so much, and I finally said to her, "Okay, you're right. You can be right. Whatever,
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
If you
Right,
really
but
need,
guess what? I bet you didn't do. I bet you didn't invite her over to have a cup of coffee.
absolutely not. No. Oh my
Exactly.
goodness.
So she got to be right and alone. That's the deal. If you're
And that's
somebody who
sad.
has to be right, there's no space for other people. That's again like making your energy
Yeah.
super big, squishes everybody around you.
Ah, yeah. And I remember I felt bad for her.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
did. And she was in conflict with everybody.
Totally.
And I
Totally.
just thought like how can you even walk around and I mean, I'd be driving like this if I was in conflict. I don't know, like just a sad place to be. And I've got to, I know a few other folks that have a strong need to be right. And I don't know if that's just, I'm not a therapist, so I don't know, but is that just like a need for acceptance? Like what would cause someone to have such a strong need to be right?
Tremendous insecurity and fragility. So one of
Ah,
the ways you can think of the need to be right, it's like when you cut yourself and then you get inflammation, when the inflammation is your body's way of padding the wound. I think that what happens is when you don't feel like you are an important being, when you don't feel like you're good enough, smart enough, enough just on your own, you have to inflame yourself with this tremendous arrogance. And so
mhm.
I think of the need to be right as really evidence of fragility and insecurity.
And do you see that much in marriage issues?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Usually what happens is we diversify our survival strategies. So one person with a lot of emotional intelligence will marry one person with a lot of practical capacity. And that's organismically a really good diversification of strategies. So there's one person
Yeah.
who's like, I'm watching our financial portfolio, and this is the plan around, getting the house pressure washed, and we need to get to the dentist, and the car needs the oil changed. And then there's another person who says, hey, I noticed that our neighbor looked really sad and his cat just died. We're going to bring some cookies over. And what happens is that's all well and good as long as both parties recognize and respect that they bring different gifts into the connection.
Right.
Problems occur when one person feels like they're more important because they have different gifts. And much of couples therapy is enhancing the awareness of the equality is not identical. Equality is pixelated.
Yeah.
Equality is little bits in different areas. That's what equal is.
Tanny, could you give us, I mean, our my audience is 99% female. And
Yeah,
so can you give a little, just I know that they're not in therapy, we're not in therapy right now, but is there a tip you can give someone that might be struggling out there in relationships that you know they're just that they can maybe take from our conversation today and maybe put it to some use to help their relationship along the way? I don't know if there's, I mean, I know there's no easy fixes, but what could you
sure.
offer them?
I love that question. So, I think one of the things I could offer is ask yourself if you have had this experience before with other partners and in your family of origin. And that gives you two answers. One is the possibility that if the common denominator is you, this is your emotional work to do. You get yourself in therapy, you get support, you get a sounding board separate from your partner. The other thing is if the answer is yes, and you continually find yourself picking men who put you down, who disrespect you, who cheat on you, you are enacting a self abusive cycle. And again, the answer would be get some help, get some support. So if you're in a high level of relationship distress, I would say ask yourself the question, have I felt this way before? And the other thing
Ah,
is, I want people to know, I want women to know, we are allowed to make work demands of our relationship. And a work demand includes things like saying, hey, we're getting into this cycle of conflict again and again and again. And I want us to get help. And if people can't afford therapy, it doesn't have to be therapy. You could go to the library together and check out a book on relationship skills, and you could journal together about questions in the book. You could read to each other chapters out of a book. You could listen to podcasts about relationship skills and communication. There's a wonderful podcast out called What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't,
mm,
which is led by, I can't remember her name, but she is a couples therapist, and she has a very interesting voice. And I say that because I tried at one point to get my husband to listen to this podcast with me, and he's like, I don't like her voice. And I'm like, that's maybe the dumbest reason in the world to not like her podcast. But he's very auditory
yeah,
oriented. So for
yeah,
him, it's like that's a deal breaker.
yeah.
But my point is, there are a million ways to
Mm,
open yourselves up to say, we want to learn skills. And relationship skills are not talents, they're not inborn things. Relationship skills are skills, which means we can learn them, just like you can learn how to cook, just like you can learn how to change your oil, just like you can learn how to paint a wall. These are all
Right.
things that you can say, hey, if I'm feeling like I'm not really excelling in this area, how can I develop more skills?
Right. That's that's great advice. Absolutely great advice. It's and you're right because not everyone wants counseling or can afford it, but you're right. There's help all over the place. They just
All
if
over.
you can seek it out and yeah, for sure. No, great advice. Thank you for that. So, how do you maintain your own well-being while supporting others through their healing journey? Because
Great
it
question.
must be stressful sometimes.
Mhm. I love that question. So I have kind of a few different things I do. One is I have a really rich social life. So I spend a lot of time with friends. I'm physically active every single day. So it could be something little like going for a half an hour walk, or it can be something sort of more strenuous. I dance. My husband and I are learning pickleball, which is kind of a blast. And then we have dogs that we walk all the time. And so I try to be physically active because I feel like exercise is the best reset for our
Hmm.
cortisol levels in our brain and in our body. And then I have a rich social life because one person can never meet all of our needs. And this is one of the things that I read about in the book that is more endemic as a problem for men than it is for women.
Right.
But social isolation means that you have a partner and you're trying to get all your needs met from them, and they're not going to have exactly the same multifacets that you have. So you should have your friend who's your culture friend. You should have your friend who's your jock friend. You should have your friend who's your watch movies and cry because they're sad movies together friend. You should have all these different friends because you have so many different facets, and that is a really big part of my emotional well-being and self-support.
Oh my goodness. You know, I never even thought of it like that before, but you're absolutely
Mhm.
right. And I think, you know, when we're filling ourselves up with and taking care of our own needs, so we know the friend that we can go to when we're sad, we know the friend that we can go to when we want to work out or, you know, have a glass of wine or whatever it is that we want to do in the world, then we've got them. So if you're in a relationship and you're just the two of you with not much social life happening on the outside, you're relying just on that one person who obviously can't meet every need that either of you would have.
Mhm. In fact, I think that a lot of affairs start because of loneliness.
Mm, wow, that's so sad.
Yeah, it
That's so
is. It
sad.
really is because it's a way that people um, unconsciously set up their lives for a massive amount of destruction, as well as their self-trust, right?
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
like, start with making more friends,
yeah.
people.
Yes. Absolutely.
Start there.
Shake the finger at them. Oh, that's perfect. Wow, Tanya, what a fantastic conversation. I'm going to just kind of skip and go a little bit of a different direction for a minute if that's
Yeah,
okay.
of course.
I have a few questions that I like to ask my podcast guests. So would it be okay if I
Of
ask you a few?
course.
All right.
Yes,
Okay.
please do.
All right, because I'd love to get to know my guests a little bit better. So, my first question for you is if you could travel anywhere in the world tomorrow, where would you go and why would you go there?
Oh my goodness. Am I allowed to change citizenship?
You can do whatever you want, wherever you want to go, whatever you want to do.
Well, there's a lot of democratic socialist countries that have a really good safety net and infrastructure, but they're quite xenophobic and they don't allow outsiders to come in. But what I like about these democratic socialist countries is that there's a real cohesion between the government and the well-being of their citizens. And I worry that that is not as intact as it once was, or at least the illusion of it, let's say, is not as intact as it once was. So I think if I could go anywhere in the world and still maintain my friends, because of course this is magical thinking, and that means I get to take all my friends with me.
That's right.
I would take all my friends with me and my adult children and my dogs, and we would all go to Switzerland or Sweden or Norway or,
Nice.
these democratic socialist countries that have really a coherent social safety net.
Yeah. Ooh, love that. Love that. Okay. What's your favorite way to unwind after a busy day?
Oh, that's a super easy answer because I do it almost every day. I take a hot Epsom salt bath with lavender oil, and I almost always fall asleep in the bathtub for half an hour.
Oh,
So it's really
that,
my nightly ritual.
wow, that sounds wonderful. And it sounds so relaxing, so relaxing. And when you're using, all of that, I have a, I mean, I'm not a therapist, but I've dealt with a lot of women's stories, and not all of them are pleasant. And
Sure,
so
sure.
sometimes you just need to get in the bath and smell some lavender.
Yes, yes. And I feel like
Yeah,
energetically, water is so um it is both symbolically and literally cleansing. So it's a way of
yeah,
kind of coming back into my own energy field at the end of the day.
love that. Okay. Do you have a favorite motivational quote that keeps you going?
Ooh, I don't have a single one, but I would say the sentiment is I'm more useful if I don't play small.
Love that. Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's not just about us, right? It's
yeah,
about if we really believe we are all one family and we're all here to be useful for one another, it doesn't serve anybody just to play small.
yeah. Especially us women.
Yes, especially as
Especially
women.
us
Yeah.
women. Yeah. Huh. Wow, you're just making my brain go. That's good. It's good though. It's always good to get a different perspective and to hear what people think, and I appreciate it. Okay, what is a favorite book that inspires you?
So there's a wonderful book from a million years ago, like I think early 80s, called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by
Ah,
Susan Jeffers.
I
And
remember that book.
it is this wonderful, very practical, written for, any human being, non-academic, but well-researched and well-explained book that talks about anxiety management and anxiety reduction and really explains beautifully the action of a phobia and how phobias are either getting worse, getting bigger, or they're getting better, getting smaller through exposure. And she explains this concept that I love, which is we often have this fantasy, I'll do that thing when I feel better. And the reality is, I will feel better when I do that thing.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yeah, it's I have a lady who wrote a story in one of the books, and she wrote it about sometimes never comes.
Totally, totally. There's another way to say that, which is as soon as you get there and there becomes here, you simply acquire another there.
Yes, yeah. I guess that's growth.
Yes.
Yeah, could be a good thing, I guess. If
Right.
you,
I
yeah,
think
go
it's
ahead.
about how quickly we move from there to here and then needing to go to the next there, right? It's
Ah,
like if we can savor that moment when there
yes,
becomes here, we move out of that little hamster wheel.
yes, absolutely, yes. Um, what about dinner? So, if you could have dinner with any woman in history, any woman at all, who would it be and why?
Ooh, again, these wonderful questions. Well, I do have a bit of a crush on Michelle Obama. So
Oh,
I would love to sit down and have dinner with her. I also have great respect for Melinda Gates.
oh, yes.
Um, yeah, I think Michelle Obama, Melinda Gates, um, those are the two who I'm thinking of right off the top of my head.
Beautiful. Yes. Yeah. Okay. And my last question, if you could whisper one truth into the ear of every woman who's struggling right now, what would you say to them?
You belong here. You belong here on Earth, and you are important. Your
Mm.
gifts matter. Don't give up.
Oh, Thank you for that. That was beautiful. I appreciate that. Thank you. Whew, wow, what a fabulous conversation. Well, I would just like everyone to know that Tanya's information is going to be in the details section of the podcast and of the video. So if you want to reach out to her in any way, you'll be able to do that. Also, we'll have the link to her book. So if you would like to learn how not to be an asshole, grab the book. I'm teasing, of course, but not really. Grab the book, and you can certainly purchase that. It's on Amazon. I have just really, really appreciated our conversation, Tanya. Thank you so much. I can tell when you speak, you have done this for a very long time, and you have amazing insights. So, and I appreciate it. I was thinking a couple months ago, one of the best thing about doing podcasts is I get to learn so much from all of the guests that come on and you guys help me to adjust my thinking or open my mind into another thought process or something. So I really appreciate that. So thank you for being so open and willing to do this. Now,
It's been a
in
delight, Julie. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. Okay, so in closing, Tanya, is there anything at all that you would like to share with the audience? Anything at all that you would like to share?
I think we are built for joy. And I think we forget that under the pile of to-dos that we become um, sort of preoccupied with as we get older.
Yes, yes, for sure. Wow. Okay. Well, a wealth of information. Thank you so much, Tanya. And
Thank you,
remember, everybody,
Julie.
you can reach out to Tanya. All of her information will be there. You can grab her book if you think that would be helpful to you. And then we will see you again for another episode of Women Like Me. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.